Spock is related to who? Today I'm going to be talking about Star Trek Strange New Worlds Season 3, Episode 4, A Space Adventure Hour. So if you haven't already watched the episode, go ahead and save this video, watch the episode, and then come on back. Admittedly, this review is coming a few days later than I planned because I had a lot of feelings about this episode. As I am sure a lot of you can guess, I really enjoyed this episode up until the end. I enjoy giving critiques about my favorite media, specifically Star Trek. I love talking about Star Trek. I love talking about the good about Star Trek. I love talking about the bad of Star Trek. In general, I try to do a positive spin on things, but this felt like a huge deviation for me. And this was the first Strange New Worlds episode where the writers kind of lost my faith. Which is not to say that they can't get it back. As a writer myself, I know that there are a lot of ways that they could kind of dig themselves out of this little problem I think that they have written for themselves. On the other hand, they could also really double down. And at this point in the series, it's really hard to say what they're going to do. Needless to say, my review of this episode is going to be a little bit different. I'm going to give 3 things about the episode I really liked and 3 things about the episode that disappointed me. Let's start with the things I really enjoyed. The costume design. The costume design in this season is literally out of this world. They have made strides above and beyond the first 2 seasons of the show. If the costume designers on season 3 don't win something during the award season for this year, I am going to be so shocked because they are knocking it out of the park. And this is the first episode of season 3 where the wigs were spot on. Finally, some good wigs. And the cool thing about this episode is that the costume design was incredibly varied. I loved these retro, almost Flash Gordon-like sci-fi costumes they had for the USS Adventure bit in the beginning. But the outfit that La'an wears in the holodeck, the outfit that Uhura wears, I mean, absolutely gorgeous. The detail on those outfits, it was incredible. I mean, congratulations, costume designing. This is your best episode so far. The second thing I liked about this episode was the layering. There's a lot of layering in the scenes, particularly the scenes where La'an is talking to somebody else while she's in the holodeck. There are many different moments of dialogue where the characters are saying something on the surface level, but there are multiple layers beneath what they are saying that I think a long-term fan of Star Trek can really appreciate. In particular, I'm thinking of there's a scene in the holodeck where La'an is talking to Uhura. It's not really Uhura, it's the holodeck character that looks like Uhura. So on the surface level, we have La'an playing a character talking to a made-up holodeck character who looks like Uhura, and they are talking about one thing. And underneath that, there is this level of it sounds like Uhura giving advice to La'an on that same thing. It's this part of where they're talking about career and love. So we have the 2 fake personalities talking to each other, and then underneath we have, the fake personality of the Uhura character talking to La'an, but it really comes off as Uhura talking to La'an. And then we go even further where it sounds like Uhura is representative of the writers of Star Trek talking to the world about why Star Trek is actually important. And then beneath that, in the context of current events, that same dialogue sounds kind of like the Star Trek fans talking to Paramount about why Star Trek is important and why it needs to continue to be the way that it has always been and moving forward into the future. And then underneath that, it's kind of like this idea of Uhura speaking for maybe even Gene Roddenberry. And this layering goes through the entire episode. So if you're watching very carefully all of the holodeck conversations, you will pick up on this layering of surface level dialogue that actually has deeper thematic, symbolic elements to it. And the third thing I really enjoyed about this episode was the throwback to other Trek. We begin with this obvious throwback to the original series and to that retro sci-fi of the late 50s, early 60s. We have Paul Wesley essentially doing a Shatner impression, but honestly without going too overboard. I don't think that he did too much of a caricature that it pushed it into absurdity. I think he did just enough for us to pick up on what he was doing and to show kind of an appreciation for that kind of acting that was common back then and is quintessential Shatner without making fun of him, and I really liked that. I also enjoyed that this episode was a very clear throwback to the Data Sherlock Holmes holodeck episodes. Obviously, there are a lot of mentions of Sherlock Holmes, including that one particular mention of Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. In this episode, it is a murder mystery. La'an is trying to solve this crime, and it felt very reminiscent of the Data episodes, particularly when she brings in Spock as her helper in this episode. Really felt like we had a Data and a Geordi moment here. And going along with linking back to old Trek, I like how they were able to introduce the holodeck and also explain why we don't have a holodeck on the Enterprise until the Next Generation. I thought that was a very smart and witty way of weaving that into the canon timeline, and explaining why it just didn't work at this time and why, you know, Kirk and Spock and them and TOS, they just didn't have a holodeck. Okay, so now let's talk about things that I didn't like in this episode. The first thing I didn't like was the B storyline. Now, if you pay attention to every Star Trek episode, almost every episode of TV out there is always a B storyline. It's a secondary storyline that is less important than the first storyline, but there's always a moment when that storyline crosses over. In this particular episode, it was the main crew outside of the holodeck going to research this quark or something that's going on in space, and then of course something going wrong because the holodeck is draining so much power, they're getting pulled into this. Basically, the B storyline didn't work for me here because it was only set up to provide stakes for the A storyline. It really didn't stand alone on its own. There really wasn't any character development going on because of it, and it really wasn't a storyline by itself, and it should have been. My second problem with this episode was timing. This is not necessarily a problem with this episode so much as it is a downside of the streaming format and only having 10 episodes for a season of television, but the timing of events, particularly relationship events, just felt like it was moving too fast. Granted, I recognize that we are supposed to assume that time has progressed and passed in between each episode of the show, but for us as viewers, it feels like we just saw a relationship spark in one episode and then all of a sudden, like, it is a full-blown relationship, and that is too fast for me. Of course, I am referencing Spock and La'an the most when I talk about this, but I'm also thinking of Ortegas, who they say is kind of like on probation and they're just going to pull her out randomly for this episode. The lack of Pelia for the last few episodes. This episode felt to me like it had been filmed to be a later episode in the season, and then it got reshuffled, and then they had to reformat it, maybe throw in that line of dialogue about Ortegas in order to make it fit earlier on in the season. It didn't feel like it was supposed to be this early on in the season. Also, the fact that we don't get any update on Captain Batel also made me feel like this was supposed to be a later episode, which personally I think would have helped a lot with the timing on multiple fronts. And finally, the relationship between Spock and La'an. This is not working for me on many different levels. I think I'll have to make my own video to talk specifically about that. But suffice it to say, Spock's love life is taking up way too much real estate in this show. I believe 100% that the actors have chemistry. I don't know that I believe the characters have chemistry, but it's very clear that the actors do, which kind of makes me wonder if this is kind of like a behind-the-scenes thing that led towards this on-screen relationship. But this rebound on relationships, essentially for both of them, really isn't working for me. Not to mention the fact that a descendant of Khan is in both a relationship with a version of Kirk and of Spock. I mean, is the universe that small? But I'm running out of time. I love that this show takes risks, but this one was too much for me.